Anthony, I'd like to just ask you to take a few minutes to tell us a little bit about yourself, about Kaufman Realty, the history. Introduce yourself to our listeners, if you would, please.
Well, I am a second-generation real estate broker. Grew up in the Holmes County, Tuscarawas, that western part of Tuscarawas County, in that area, and I was kind of introduced to the real estate and auction field from a young age. My father, Dave, actually started the business in 1975. Mm-hmm. So next year will be 40 years for us. He, prior to that, was an auctioneer and also a real estate agent with another company in the Dover, New Philly area. Mm-hmm. Decided that he wanted to work more in a little bit more of a rural area. I guess Dover and Philly is fairly rural, but preferred to work at that time, more the livestock auctions and dealing with farms and so forth. So he started his company in 1975, and we've grown since then. Still continue to hold a lot of the same areas, work in the same areas, do a lot of the same things that we did 40 years ago.
Wonderful, wonderful. And when it comes to real estate agents in general, share with our clients the way that you interact with them. What's the benefit of working with a real estate agent as opposed to, and I don't know if it's as common as it used to be, but I know that growing up I would see a lot of for sale by owner signs. Can you talk a little bit about the contrast between those two approaches when a person is selling real estate?
Sure. Obviously, real estate agents, one of the main things that they bring to a transaction is market knowledge. The ability to know what a specific type of property is worth in a specific area. They can hopefully price the property in the correct market range that will allow it to sell quickly or within the time frame that the seller is looking for. The other thing that a real estate agent brings is there are a lot of pitfalls that can happen throughout a real estate transaction. There's actually a lot of laws that are on the books that are there not just for properties sold by real estate agents, but also for sale by owners. And what a real estate agent can do is make sure that those laws are adhered to. It could be, for instance, here in Stark County or be it Tuscarawas County, there are point-of-sale restrictions that require certain inspections must be conducted prior to any transfer of property. It's things like that a real estate agent should have knowledge of and should have the ability to ensure is taken care of. Many times you'll see the FSBO or the for sale by owner in an area that the real estate market is moving fairly quickly. That it may not take a real estate agent's expertise to determine market value, and the properties are selling quick enough that it's not going to take as much negotiation. Can perfectly understand that if somebody feels they have the ability, the time, they want to deal with those hassles, that they can try and sell something on their own. But the one thing that a real estate agent will always bring is the knowledge of the market and hopefully the ability to price the property correctly, because oftentimes you'll see a property that may languish on the market for a considerable amount of time. People wondering why that property is still in the market, and it's not anything to do with the location or the property, and it just comes down to something as simple as having been overpriced and has gotten stale in that marketplace. If an agent is doing their job, they will know pretty much what the range is for that property in that market and can hopefully price the property within that range.
Right. And talking about market value, thinking back to what the market has done over the last 7 or 8 years, certainly it varies from geography or area to area, I'm sure. But what's your sense of where we are in the real estate market today compared to where the values were prior to the correction that took place in 07 or 08?
Sure. And the market is a fairly broad term. Market deals with geography. It deals with property type. And those can span, well, for instance, your listening audience here is going to span a lot of the eastern part of Ohio, and you're going to have everything from downtown Canton, Akron, urban areas to Holmes County, Tuscarawas County, where it's very rural, and those properties are going to be completely different. So depending on the property type and the location, I think we have seen that most of the property are back to where they would have been prior to the burst of the bubble. That being said, every facet of the industry is different. I know that in some areas commercial property still will languish behind a little bit. In other areas there's still a gluttony of residential property that is out there that needs to be moved. We've seen for ourselves in some of the rural areas that we conduct business that the ag land has been very strong. Now, that being said, the commodity prices are not quite where they were a year ago, and some of that tillable production ground has probably slipped in value since then. For instance, if we get into eastern Ohio, we then start talking about acreage that is really affected by the gas and oil market. You're seeing a lot of people separating gas and oil rights from the surface and selling those as separate entities. So in general, the market, I would say, is probably where it was prior to the bubble. It obviously experienced a major setback, and for the most part, I think we've crawled out of that.
Yeah, and one of the reasons I asked that question, I know that in speaking with clients at times, I've heard the comment made, boy, we'd like to think about moving, but we're convinced that the market value is still so far below where we bought that we can't afford to take the loss that we think we would need to take if we were going to sell. So...
True, and I hear that as well, and I think part of that was we experienced such an incredible amount of growth in short amount of time in the real estate market, and so the initial inclination is that if we have not experienced that type of growth again in that rapid an amount of time, that we are not back to where we were before. Now, I guess, and we haven't, and you can talk to this better than I can, Neil, but we haven't seen inflation, so technically I don't know that you could look at needing to have an inflated price above and beyond where we would have been back in, say, 2005 or so. But by and large, I think that the majority of the properties have risen back out of there. One area that I think is still probably affected is some of your higher-end residential homes, homes that are in gated communities, things like that may not have come back. And you may never see some of that stuff back at the prices that they were at one point, but that's okay. The market can adjust. You can get back to what is a new normal.
Right. My perception, and in most cases when I ask a question, I already know the answer to it, especially on the program, but this one I really don't. My perception is that the more urban areas saw more of an impact in general than maybe some of the more rural, and maybe in particular Holmes County. It just seems to me like that bubble bursting never quite seemed to affect our area maybe quite as much as it did a lot of other areas. I know we do a lot of work up in Cleveland too, and boy, there were some areas where it just seemed like the bottom fell out.
I think that's an excellent observation. I think in general across the United States, anywhere that you saw incredible gains in the real estate market is where you saw the largest losses. If you went to coastal areas, a lot of, especially second home locations, they saw a lot of that tremendous drop in value. If you looked at places such as Las Vegas and other areas, urban areas like that, they saw a lot of value lost. Obviously, the stories are rampant when it comes to places like Detroit, but a lot of those urban areas saw a tremendous amount of decline in property value, and that's due probably to loss of manufacturing jobs, things like that go well beyond just the market itself. When you look at a community like Holmes County or other rural communities that seem to have almost an insulation against some of this stuff, you'll notice that if you were to take Holmes County's real estate values, they have trended up for many years. They probably have not trended up as rapidly as, say, a coastal community in Florida. And so consequently, they tend not to fall off quite as much. Even Holmes County, Tuscarawas has experienced some of their own setbacks, but not nearly to the effect that a lot of the other areas did.
Right. One of the benefits that I always talk about when people come to our office and are in need of just stepping back and organizing their financial life is our ability to bring into the conversation other professionals that they may need the services of. For example, when you talk about the term estate planning, that encounters or encompasses a lot of different areas. It encounters not only looking at what you have in terms of assets and liabilities, it involves thinking about what's the tax treatment involved with those. And so maybe we need the input of an accountant. How are things structured from a legal perspective? Do we know that things are going to flow the way that we want them to at the time of an incapacity or passing of the owner? And one of the things that we can do as independent advisors is to bring into the conversation professionals that can speak to those things, because I'm not an attorney. We don't do legal work. As the disclosure at the beginning of the program says, we're not accountants either, but we recognize situations where those kinds of things are needed. And I think that is a real benefit and value to the work that we do in serving our clients. You mentioned in terms of real estate transactions, other things that need to be done. In your industry, is there a working relationship with individuals like that so that when someone comes to you, that they know that you can guide them through that and connect them with individuals that they need, even if you don't do that kind of work yourself?
Absolutely. I mean, depending on what it is that you're looking to take care of, for instance, the purchase of a residential home, there's certain inspections that just they need to be done. You need to ensure that that the buyer knows exactly what they're getting into.
What
when they
are some of
purchase.
those?
Typical inspections obviously would start with things like termite. You may have a whole home inspection, which is pretty normal. That's just going to go through and give you an overall, I guess, an overall aspect or understanding where the home is and what condition it's in. If you are in a rural area, they're going to want to inspect the well and septic, some other issues like that. And there's additional radon inspections. Something that's become a little bit more frequent is things like a mold inspection. From time to time, you'll have a lead-based paint inspection, some different things like that. So there are the inspections that that will help to put a buyer at ease, and you definitely want to have those things conducted. In the event that you are purchasing property and you're going to go through, obviously, with a closing, you always, and I would do this for myself in any purchase, you always want to make sure that you have a good legal counsel. I would not personally purchase a property and try to do my own title opinion on the property. Having been in this for around 17 years, I just don't think that it is worth me trying to take my little amount of knowledge and somehow turn that into an expertise. Why not use someone who truly understands what they're doing when it comes to looking at a title, making sure that the property is as it is said to be.
Right. And you bring up a good point, Anthony, and that is, I've said a number of times on the program before, I think it's really important to know what you're good at. I think it's more important to know what you're not good at. Because, for example, I don't work on my own car because I realize I could take a Saturday afternoon and spend all of my time, be really frustrated, and still end up having to pay somebody to fix what I tried to do under that hood. So I think that that's a very good point in terms of tapping into the resources and the knowledge of somebody who does operate in a given area, whatever that area may be, on a full-time basis. And I think that that is a very good point. We were talking a little before the break about something that I'd like to come back to and elaborate on a little bit more. And it's probably, from my perspective, one of the biggest mistakes that people can make when it comes to real estate. And that is going into the transaction without an attorney reviewing the purchase agreement, the other legal documents, and offering guidance. And Anthony, can you tell us a little bit about your perspective being in the industry full-time on the importance of that, some of the problems that can come about if people don't involve the right professionals and so forth?
Sure. Obviously, when you're dealing with title companies, attorneys, legal transactions, generally, the party that you are working, that you're purchasing from is going to have somebody representing their concerns.
Right.
You, as a buyer or seller, would be advised to have someone representing your concerns, especially when you are buying rural property that will have some form of title. And title is just very simple. It is more or less everything that has been filed on that property for its entire history. I mean, it will have everything from mortgages that have been filed to potentially gas and oil leases, down to liens, anything like that the property could be subject to. And if you are taking title or ownership to that property and you are not aware of what is there, those encumbrances could hinder you greatly if you go to sell that property, or if for some reason something has not been released properly, you could be subject to it. And that could be something like a mortgage. It could be something like an easement where someone has a right to cross your property, numerous different things. And that's where someone who has a background in that, someone who has experience in searching those titles and going to the courthouse and pulling the deeds and pulling the different affidavits and so forth that would go with that, is going to be able to shed so much more light on that than you as an individual.
Yeah, and I have some personal experience in relation to that, because before we moved to the Holmes and Wayne County area about 20 years ago, my wife and I had an offer on a home in Worcester back in 95, I think it was, and 94, 95. And we had not quite gotten to the point of involving an attorney in the transaction, but that particular deal fell apart simply because it was a new area for us in terms of buying property, and there were some expenses that were customarily split in different ways, and it was not explained to us. And by the time it came to light, it was essentially the deal breaker. And so can you talk a little bit about what is customary, or when you look at that closing document that breaks out the different expenses associated with the transaction, what does that normally look like for a buyer or a seller?
Well, the document you're talking about is a HUD statement. And a HUD statement is just more or less a spreadsheet showing where the outlay of money goes. When the money comes in from the buyer, this is who's paying for what. This is where the money is going to. Is it going to prorate taxes? Is it going to the title insurance premium? Things like that. And there really is no specific industry standard. Every area is different. A normal thing for Tuscarawas County and Holmes County, probably most of Stark, is that the title insurance premium is going to be split between the buyer and the seller. If you go to Coshocton County, that's completely different.
And the title insurance is basically what protects the individual in the event there were issues that were not uncovered in the title search.
That is exactly right. Title insurance is a one-time fee that places insurance on that title, that in the event the title company and or the attorney failed to note something, an encumbrance on that, that is there then to take care of that. But if you go to Coshocton County, that's going to be paid all by the purchaser. And so every area is different, and that's why it's nice that when you're going into an area, if you're working with an agent that is from that area, they have a tendency to understand the local, I'm going to say, customs when it comes to some of those transactions. Now, there are other things that are going to be much more standard. For instance, the proration of taxes. That's something that is going to be pretty standard across the state of Ohio. The seller is expected to prorate the taxes to time of closing. The seller is also expected to provide good deed, marketable title, and to convey the property to the buyer. And the conveyance fee is something that is generally going to be paid by the seller as well. But again, that stuff is different depending on where you're at. We conduct auctions actually in Pennsylvania as well as some in Florida and other areas. And every area that we get into, we try to get in before, familiarize ourselves with the way that a real estate transaction is handled so that we can inform the potential buyers of what they're going to be looking at.
Right. And I think if there's anything I'm hearing Anthony say is that there are certain customs, but it's important to realize and understand that each transaction is a negotiation. And so certain things may be customary, but depending on the unique circumstances of the transaction, what the buyer may be bringing to the situation, what the seller may be offering, each one of those is something that can be looked at in its own right and negotiated based on the particular case that is involved.
Absolutely. That is an excellent point, Neil. Every transaction that you go into, even though there may be the expected norm, those things are negotiable. There's some things obviously that are not going to be, but there are things that are negotiable. Now, things differ. If you're looking at purchasing a property at auction, be it from a company in this area, be it from us, those things are generally going to have preset terms at which you will purchase it. There will not be negotiation. The only negotiation that's involved there is the price. But if you are looking at a traditional listing and you're making an offer on it, be it a commercial, be it residential, vacant acreage, those things are negotiable.
Right. Well, one of the things we wanted to certainly make sure that we spent a fair amount of time on today is the whole question of what are some of the most common mistakes that people make in this area? Because as I mentioned just a little earlier, many times people on average enter into a real estate transaction about every 6, 7, 8 years, roughly. So even over the course of an adult lifetime, it's something that you may only do 4 or 5 times in your life on average.
True.
And just because you haven't made a mistake on previous transactions doesn't mean that there aren't mistakes that could enter into future transactions. And so can you speak, Anthony, a bit to what are some of the most common mistakes that people make?
I'd say that the number one thing that we see as agents is just when emotion becomes involved in the sale. It could be as a purchase, it could be as a sale, but any time that emotional factor comes in, enables people, or I shouldn't say enables, but it makes people make decisions that they may otherwise not do. For instance, the emotion of having lived in a property for XYZ amount of years and equating that to additional value in the property because it's where your children grew up, it's where it was your first home, things like that come into you valuing your property higher than what the market itself may say. So that's one of the typical things you see. Another thing that you will see that generally,
if I might make a comment there, that is so true in the work that we do with clients as well on the investment and insurance side, because when the market takes a dip, what happens? Our phone starts to ring, people want to sell out of the market, and things along those lines. And especially back in 07 and 08, in the last major correction that we saw, we spent an awful lot of time talking with people about now is not the time that you want to be liquidating it unless you really need the money. And our goal as financial advisors is to try and assume and budget and plan for some of those things, because we know that it's very possible that people are going to need to liquidate a portion of their investment holdings, but we don't expect they're necessarily going to do that all at one time unless they've told us that there's some special circumstance where that is likely to happen. And so the knowledge and being told what might happen in the future and experiencing it are two very different things. And so we spent a lot of time coaching our clients and really earning and proving our value during that time to try to prevent them from making a mistake. And those clients that took our advice and wrote it out, we're back to closing at all-time highs now.
Sure.
So pretty much over the long haul, they were where we expected that they would be. We can't guarantee that. Certainly past performance is not a guarantee of future results. But for those that took our advice, it's worked out pretty well for them. And what you're saying is in the real estate market, the same can be true.
It's very true. Dave is very fond, I should say Dad is very fond of a saying that he has, and it says that when others walk, you run, and when they run, you walk. Mm-hmm. And if you're able to just, and it doesn't always completely hold true, but if you're able to keep that in mind when properties are bringing tremendous amounts of money, maybe that's not the time to get in the market. When it's going the other way, maybe it is the time to get in. I think one of the greatest ways to build trust with a potential buyer or seller is telling them the timing is not right right now. And just the fact that you are willing to say, in essence, walk away from a potential transaction for you as the agent says to your buyer, your seller, that their goals are also your goals in the end. I think that's incredibly important.
Right, to know that you're on the same side. And that's one of the reasons we were talking about the involvement of an attorney. Certainly, from my perspective, it's not that you think that the other party is necessarily trying to take advantage or do anything inappropriate. It's that the other party's attorney is looking out for their interests. And if you're going into a transaction, whether it's real estate or any other environment, in my opinion, where the other party is represented by counsel, it only makes sense in my mind to have somebody who is watching out for your interests as well and making sure that there aren't any areas that are just simply overlooked because of unfamiliarity. So what are some other areas that you see people make mistakes in, or look back and say, boy, I wish I'd have known?
One of the simplest things that we see in just a traditional listing is when the initial offer comes in, that first offer, that call from another agent or a buyer coming in and say, I want to place an offer, writing up an offer and going to a seller, and the first thing out of the seller's mouth is, well, it's early. Things could change. They can only get better. The initial assumption is that the first offer many times is just a starting point, and hey, we want to get better. We can do better than this. If a seller, again, will remove that emotion and understand that just because the first offer has nothing to do with it becoming a larger offer or anything like that. So we oftentimes see people unwilling to look at first offers because they're simply that, a first offer. If you can get away from that, if you can understand that it's within the range of the value of the property, many times the first offer can be one of the best offers.
From your experience, is there an average in terms of number of counters? I mean, it certainly varies from each case to case, but is there any kind of what percentage of transactions are accepted with the initial offer compared to at least one or two rounds of counters?
I would say it's very rare that they're actually accepted in the first one. When I refer to a first offer, it's just that initial offer that comes in, not necessarily the remaining counter offers will go back and forth. It's just that entire, I guess, that little transaction there, the unwillingness to make a counter on a first offer. But I'd say there's a very small percentage of offers that are accepted initially. And I would hate to put a number to that, but I don't know that it happens that frequently.
Right. One of the things you mentioned just a little bit ago had to do with required inspections and those type of things. I know that when we have purchased property in the past, we have done inspections that were not required because, again, not suggesting that the present owner is trying to conceal anything, but the property has been there for 25, 30 years. Unless we've really looked at it very intentionally, how do we know what's there? What percentage of properties do you find that someone takes the initiative to hire an inspector to come in and evaluate it based on the buyer's perspective, and how important do you feel that is?
That's going to be dependent on the property type. Residential, I would say it's probably 75% that will have inspections done that are over and above what is required to transfer, and it may even be higher. And again, when I say this, I'm specifically referring to private treaty listings, a traditional listing, not an auction. That's a completely different game. But in that case there, I'd say you're probably looking at 75 to 80% of the transactions that happen will have inspections above and beyond the required inspections to transfer that. And I'd say that the majority of those, it's not a situation that the buyer is worried that the seller is trying to cover something up. They just would feel a lot better knowing the exact history of the property. And I know for myself, in my home, there'd be a lot of things that may crop up that I don't even think about when I'm filling out. If I'd be filling out a residential disclosure to hand to a prospective buyer, I would never think that is an issue. Wouldn't be a situation that I'd want to cover it up. It's just something that skips your mind.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and that's one of the benefits I know for even us personally, that going through that process, it just allows you to know that somebody who is trained in evaluating the soundness of the property, as well as any things that maybe aren't problems right now, but you need to be aware of in terms of budgeting for. When's that roof going to need to be replaced? What's the furnace look like? You know, all of those kind of things. It's one thing when you drive by and the curb appeal of the property and you see it, you like it, you want it, but what's the foundation look like? You know, what type of issues need to be factored into the cost of that property, not only on the day that it closes, but also for the next number of years in terms of wear items that you can reasonably expect that you're going to have to replace and just maintain. So any other common mistakes you can think of that people either have a tendency to make, or just things that they need to be conscious of going into this area?
You know, I don't know that there are anything that I would say is a common mistake. There's oftentimes mistakes that are made or just made in haste. You know, forgetting to do something, wanting a transaction to happen quicker, and overlooking things. So it could be a lot of small things. Generally, it's not one large catastrophic mistake that's made. It's like anything else that happens. There may be a series of just small mistakes that a buyer or seller makes, and it's usually just due to wanting that transaction to take place. It may be simple things, but as they add up, they can add up to a much larger issue at the end. So to say that there's a common, I don't know that there's specifically common mistakes that I could point to, but I can just say that take your time, make sure you do things in a very thorough fashion, get them done in the proper amount of time. You obviously don't want to go beyond your contract, but that being said, don't rush to do something and forget about the small things that need to be done.
Right. Along the lines of that topic, especially for first-time home buyers, what's the timetable? You find a house and you like it. What's a reasonable timetable for someone to expect in terms of, you know, negotiating the deal, and then more importantly, all of the work that has to be done for the property to transfer to them?
Well, negotiations can happen in a couple of days. You and I could sit down and you could make an offer on my home, and within 24 hours we could have a signed contract. They could take a couple of weeks, and it depends on logistics. It might be something where you're out of the country, I can't get a hold of you, that type of thing. But those, once the negotiations have taken place, once you have a contract, an actual a deal in place, then you're probably looking at in today's day and age, to get everything closed, to get financing taken care of, probably a minimum of 45 days from the point of having a deal. And during that, you're going to have make sure that all of the inspections are being conducted, that the financing is a big thing today. It used to be that you could have a property financed in 21 to 30 days and get it done fairly quickly. Nowadays, that's unlikely. So you want to have that financing taken care of. And then, depending on what courthouse or what county you're in, the different courthouses are just a lot busier. If you get into southern and eastern Ohio, you have a difficult time to get your deeds through to close quickly because they are inundated with gas and oil requests. And so it just becomes a situation that they unfortunately don't have the manpower to do things as quickly as they might in another area. But I guess if you figure on 45 to 60 days, you're probably going to hit it in that window.
And Anthony, you touched on something that was really my next question, and that is, how have you seen the oil and gas boom in the area? What's that done to the real estate market? What opportunities or challenges has that presented for people in general?
Well, we're fortunate in that one of our partners and agents lives right in the heart of the boom in Guernsey County, and he was a part of it from the early stages and continues to be heavily involved in it. And it's like any other boom. It's presented a lot of opportunities for potential investors, and like anything else, it also presents potential pitfalls. We've talked about title insurance and some things like that. One of the things that we've seen is title insurance, given the value of gas and oil rights and given the potential for, unfortunately, lawsuits that come with things like that, title insurance no longer will insure your mineral rights. They have backed out of that, and that's just been due to the incredible amount of money that has come into the area in the form of people looking to invest in oil and gas rights and in the form of potential royalties and bonus payments from them.
Right. I'm a first-time home buyer, let's say. I pick up the phone and I call your office, I call another office. What should I expect? Walk me through a person's initial experience. You know, they're looking for their first home or any home for that matter, but what should they expect in terms of the process?
I think the most important thing and the first thing that an agent should do is set up a face-to-face meeting to sit down and you know, you and I can talk about it over the phone. We can get an idea of what you're looking for, and we can talk about representation, the fact that I'm going to be working for you as a potential buyer, so that you can share pertinent details with me. We can do all that stuff on the phone, but one thing that we cannot do on the phone is I cannot see your reaction to different things that I ask.
Right.
And I think it's important that an agent be able to look across the table, look a potential buyer or seller in the eyes, and find out from them exactly what it is and what is most important. I mean, we have seen situations in the past where people will say, you know, it is incredibly important that we are in this price range. However, when you start talking about a large backyard for their children, you quickly see that that's actually more important than the price.
Right.
So it's things like that if you don't have that face-to-face conversation with them, you're never going to know. So I think the initial approach for myself and at least our agents as well as other agents is get that face-to-face meeting, sit down and find out exactly what it is, what the driving force is for that buyer.
Right, right. Because at the end of the day, really, when you look at the work, Anthony, that you do with real estate, and really the work that we do with helping people in their financial lives in general, it's not about the money, but it is about the money in the sense that it's about what the money can do for them. It's about the dreams. It's about, you know, bringing those things that are important to them on an emotional level to life, and setting reasonable expectations, and in some cases working with the individual so that if maybe now is not the time that they're able to realize those things, that they can set themselves on a course where they can achieve them with some proper steps taken.
True. Very true.
Very much so. So when it comes to working through the oil and gas situation, you were saying that title insurance really doesn't cover that, primarily because of the litigation that's come and realizing the liability that is there now.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Anytime that you see such a quick influx of money, there's going to be somebody that is going to be left holding the bag.
Right.
And in the situation of title insurance, it quickly became pretty evident that maybe some of the title examinations that were done in the past were not up to current standards. For instance, the number one thing, standard title title opinions were 42 years. Well, it's very possible that reservations or leases were placed on properties prior to that 42 years. So that standard in itself was not good enough for the insurance that they were having. You're now seeing title checks go back to 100 years, and if you want to have a property that has a true mineral search done on the property, they're going to be going back 120 years, and they're going to be going a lot more in depth than what would have been a standard just 3 to 5 years ago.
Right. Yeah, it's just the way that the industry and market develops and responds to changes that take place that a number of years ago, actually not that many years ago, really were not a concern. I mean, when would you say that this began to develop? I mean, when did the market begin to change in terms of the focus on the oil and natural gas rights?
I would say that we started to separate oil and gas rights as a separate deedable entity and sell those separately probably about 4 years ago.
Right.
And there were rumblings of that maybe a little bit before as well, but I'd say probably around 4 years is when we started looking at those as a completely separate entity.
Right. Wonderful. Well, we're coming to the end of our program here, and I'd like to thank you, Anthony, for taking time to be with us. Any final thoughts you'd like to share with our listeners?
Well, Neil, I've just really appreciated the opportunity to come up here and speak with you. Obviously, I love your approach to this program, just being an educational, getting information out, because if there's anything that we've learned in the past 40 years, information is knowledge. Exactly.
Well, I'd like to pause and take just a few minutes toward the end of the program here to encourage our listeners to, this special week of Thanksgiving, taking time to ponder what we really have to be thankful for with family, faith, and the blessings that we are afforded by being in this country. And sometimes it is very easy to allow the superfluous things that creep into that day to overshadow what the main focus really should be. But certainly there are many things that we have to be thankful for, even in those instances where circumstances are less than maybe what we may have hoped for or designed if we were completely in control of all things, and we know that we're not. But even in difficult times, we can pause and be thankful for some of the little things. And I'd just like to take a moment and encourage our listeners to maintain the proper focus and to remember what the day is really all about. And so with that, we'd like to thank you for joining us. Wish all of our listeners a blessed Thanksgiving this week, and we will look forward to seeing you again on the next edition of Dollars and Common Sense. I'm Neil Clemens, your host. Blessings to you.